It is No Gifts, Please, the parenting podcast by the pair with no real gifts, but a whole lot of gumption. Hey everyone, I'm Steve Noviello.
And I'm Jenny Ann Chondo.
You know, I have no gifts, but my son does.
He really does. Both of them. You're referencing one in particular with today's topic.
Well, because of today's topic. So we recently had parent-teacher conferences. Have you had this yet?
Oh,
Brighton?
yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I don't know if you recall, so our oldest Jacob has always been very academic. He enjoys math in particular, like to the point where we'll give him a pad and a paper and he'll just sit there teaching himself math. Like he just enjoys.
No, like he's already past my skill level. I can no longer hang
is like
with him.
So fascinated by numbers and calculations and whatever. So he tested for the TAG program at school, and I think you had to get like a 99.
Talented and gifted.
Yeah.
In some places it's gifted and talented, so they wouldn't know that.
GAT, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So it's TAG at our school. So he got a 98 instead of a 99. And I remember at the time thinking like, oh, don't be that parent who's like, well, my child really should be. But I was like, you know what? He kind of really should be.
He really should be.
So I went to his teachers, his kindergarten teacher and his first grade teacher. And I was like, what do I do? Because there's an appeals process and they ask you for additional data, but they won't tell you what the data should be.
Did you give them your notebooks?
Well, so I was like,
just come over.
Well, that was the thing. So I was like, he will sit there and like go through reams of paper, just like doing math and figuring things out. And and they said, well, do you have any of it? And I said, well, no, because it's so normal for him to do that I don't hang it on the fridge because he's going to do it again the next day. Right. So the talented teacher was saying, it's not necessarily about him being a good student. It's about his mind working differently. And then we went to some like very clear examples of like how I think he might have a photographic memory. Anyway, he got in. Fast forward to the parent teacher conference with the TAG teacher. And I was like, hey, I just want to make sure he's in the right place.
I just want to make sure he's 99 instead of 98.
And she said, I think I've almost never met a kid who is more appropriately placed than your son is in this class. His mind is so comfortable here, and he would be bored to tears in a different math environment. However, when it comes to mathematics in particular, that's not an experience that all kids have. So I think that there's about 110, 120 kids in the first grade, and I think there are maybe 10 or 12 kids in TAG math.
Sure.
So that's what, 10%-ish,
I'm
kids?
surprised it's even 10%.
Yeah.
So, since not all of us are Steve's son, and
I've got two kids. The jury's still out on the second one.
Many of us are parenting somebody who is having an opposite reaction, and this may still even play. Our guest today, I've been so excited about him because of this topic in particular, which is mathematics anxiety and just the angst over learning something that's new like that. He is Dr. Aditya Nagrath, who is actually a father of two himself. He has worked in the education psychology field, treating mathematics anxiety. And then he's also the founder of this digital platform that some of you may be familiar with. It's called Elephant Learning, and it's education resources for parents and teachers. But today specifically, we're focusing on sort of that math anxiety. So, Dr. Nagrath, good to see you. Thank you so much for coming on for those of us who don't have a Jacob.
Let's kind of start at the beginning here. What is it about math in particular that we use words like anxiety afterward? What is it for kids?
Sure. Well, it's a combination of maybe two or three things why math is special. But one of the things that we talk about in the book, Treating Mathematics Anxiety, is that human beings are kind of meaning-making machines. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to assign meanings to the experiences that we're having. And so when a student is doing mathematics or anything else for that matter, so it doesn't matter if it's basketball or piano, the belief system that they're assigning it boils down to, I can do this or I can't do this. And so then the reason why mathematics is special is because with basketball or with piano, you could choose another instrument, you could choose another sport. But if for math and reading, that's the entire game when it comes to education. And so somehow we got to treat it a little bit more strictly.
Like you have to go through it. You can't go around it. You can't go under it. There are certain math things that you must learn. This was okay when we were, we get a lot of pitches for different guests and things like that. This topic appealed to me because I was somebody who had math anxiety, and then so that's why I got into journalism. I guess can't do math, but I can write. But what you said was that there are studies that show that up to 80% of kindergarten students are not able to understand their teacher in math. Explain what that means. That's actually highly disturbing.
Yeah. So what the data shows is that 4 out of 5 students start kindergarten underprepared for the kindergarten curriculum. And this happens completely along income lines. And when you dive into what that means is that there's a gap in understanding around the language of the numbers. And that gap sort of forms from the idea that parents think of counting to 10 as just saying the numbers aloud, whereas kindergarten thinks counting to 10 is, can you give me 10 things? And the child's able to slide over 10 things and stop on 10. And so this language gap kind of exacerbates over time because we don't necessarily hold children back. So like if they don't get it, we just kind of figure, hey, maybe they'll get it the next year. And this leads to situations where in low-income neighborhoods, children are as much as 3 years behind their funded peers. So like you have third graders sitting in a third grade classroom somewhere around the country, all over the country. And that student's understanding of numbers rivals a kindergartner, and they're learning how to multiply, which is an impossible situation for both the student and the teacher because multiplication is defined as repeated addition. So if you don't got a strong understanding of addition, multiplication is impossible.
I think that also, and we see this actually, so in my line of work, I do a lot of consumer advocacy and a lot of consumer education. And one of the big things that we see with adults when it comes to financial literacy is they're at a point in their life where they're thinking to themselves, I know I should know this. So I get to a point where I'm embarrassed to ask or afraid to say that I don't. So I kind of sit quietly and play along while at the expense of an education. Is that the same for kids who have this kind of anxiety around mathematics, that they watch their peers continue to develop mathematically and they kind of just sit there and think, okay, I know I should know this because everyone else knows it, but I don't. And maybe I'm a little embarrassed, and that's where that anxiety comes from?
So the root of the anxiety is the lack of understanding. They don't have the meaning around the words that are being used. And I mean, the real challenge then becomes, what are the strategies that you're going to use to get through life? And it could be that a lot of these things that you're saying when it comes to financial literacy, those are the same coping mechanisms that they're using when it comes to math anxiety, because finances as a topic is heavily mathematically based. I mean, money is numbers.
Mm-hmm. How do you identify the difference between a student perhaps who is maybe just a slower learner and somebody who's actually experiencing anxiety around mathematics?
A lot of the students that are experiencing mathematics anxiety are engaged in avoidance tactics. So same as like what you just described with I should understand this, but I don't understand this, so I'm just not going to say anything. This is a strategy that's fear-based, because using this strategy, you're basically guaranteed to never understand this.
Right. You just never will. And you can't go any further along. It's not like in science where I don't understand this unit, but we're going to start a new unit and we're all going to be fresh and we're all going to start with a clean slate. It will just continually get worse. So how do we help our kids? You mentioned like that kindergarten is sort of that starting place for mathematics for students. Is there something that all parents should be doing before kindergarten to shore their children up better when the learning begins? Yeah.
So like, we use what we call like this three-step process, right? So it's like define. The word started with an R. I'm blanking it right now, but it's basically like, remember, like recognize. There we go. Recognize. And then the third step is to produce. So like the production step for counting is give me 10 items. The recognize step is just playing with fingers. How many fingers am I holding up? How many things do I have here? Can they recognize the number versus can they give you the number? And define is just, here's one, here's two things, here's three things. It's the same as what most parents are doing. But But that produce step, that's maybe the step they're not getting. Now, if you can get that before they get into kindergarten up to 10, then theoretically speaking, they enter kindergarten prepared for the kindergarten curriculum, and then they do well in the education system. But it's like when they don't come in prepared, then they don't understand the teacher and they continuously don't understand the teacher.
So when you're at a point then when your child is actually experiencing anxiety around mathematics, so this is more of like more than a learning comprehension issue, does it become kind of a psychological barrier as well to education for these kids?
Yeah, I mean, if you're engaged in avoidance strategies and you're telling yourself the story that like you're going to fail, then you kind of produce that story. And we've all kind of had that experience. Even if we believed we can do it, there were times we believed that we couldn't do it. That's kind of the debate happening. They're looking for evidence on both sides. And that's why the strategy we recommend in the book is to try to stay on the I can side, to believe in them, to say, I believe you can do this. But then the second part of the strategy is you have to meet them at their level of understanding, because if you go above their level of understanding, well, that doesn't work because they don't get it. And if you go below their level of understanding, they might think you're patronizing them. So it's about finding that level of understanding and then meeting them there.
This makes a lot of sense to me. And that's why I think that so many schools are doing pullouts for math too, so that they're not doing as much comparison, right? So like Jacob's doing his math on his own, perhaps not in front of the other students, so that they're not feeling bad about themselves. And then students that might need a little bit of extra help. Here's my question around math, and you can maybe speak to this because it's your profession. I'm noticing so many parents, and we go to a fairly academically challenging school, they're getting private math tutoring from like age 5. And I was shocked by that. I thought, what is that? Aren't they supposed to be learning that in school? Isn't that what school's for? Are they learning that in school? Do you think that we're making things too challenging for the overall average student if we're needing outside math help? Or is that just the way that it is in 2024?
Well, I mean, elephant learning is technically outside math help. So.
Yeah. And do you I guess what I'm wondering is elephant learning for just like your average, it's for every student, or is it for the students that maybe need a little bit of help? Like is regular school just not enough anymore?
Well, so what our system was designed to do was to meet students at their level of understanding and then start building them from there. And so it doesn't really matter if your student's ahead or behind, because we will find the level. But like, to answer your question, I think that, I mean, obviously it doesn't hurt. And I think that what's really happening is more of a like daycare type situation, because it's like, I could put my child in activities, but like one activity that's always going to make me feel good for a certain style of parent is education. If I put them into the Kumon or the Mathnasium or what have you, the Sylvan Learning Center, then like, hey, I know at least that they're getting nourishment for their mind. My wife tends towards like basketball and like, oh, well, at least they're going to exercise. But like, I think a lot of the decisions that maybe we make as parents is like, well, we're comfortable with the extra mind nourishment, body nourishment they're getting with this time, even though we can't be there.
So you think that the Mathnasium, the Kumons, I think you mentioned Sylvan, do you think they are just like a babysitter, but that makes the parent feel better about where they are?
Yeah, I mean, the real challenge is that between 3:30 and 5, I still potentially need to work. So like,
the kids need to go somewhere.
Right? The kids need to go somewhere. And like, we learned this during the pandemic, because when school closed and it became all remote, I mean, this was the main challenge that people had.
When we're talking about math anxiety in particular, again, the difference between just, hey, my kid is maybe challenged, or they're actually experiencing some sort of like anxiety surrounding, mathematics. When does this usually present itself? I know that you mentioned that kids displaying avoidance or avoidance behavior and whatnot when it comes to mathematics. But is there a point at which this usually kind of comes to the surface in terms of a child's age or academic development?
Almost half of first and second graders report math anxiety. I got that one from Psychology Today.
Wow.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, that's where I go back to the question of like, if half of the students, something's wrong with like the system overall. And I know that you're kind of like, look, that's why I made the solution. That's why I wrote the book. But like, are we introducing concepts too early, or are parents not doing are we as parents not doing our jobs leading up to kindergarten?
Well, so it's just a gap in the standards. So like the reason why the top 20% income earners children enter prepared is because typically they end up in preschool, and preschool ensures that they met the standard of, can you produce 10 items? But like when this particular ailment was introduced to me, even I was like, well, I think, I'm just going to have my kid count to 100. And then it was explained to me that like, well, this understanding piece, right? So like, if you're just saying the numbers aloud, it doesn't necessarily mean that you get it. And so now when you get into the classroom and they start talking about the teens, it's even harder because you got to recognize two numerals as something more than just the one numeral. And this is actually one of the challenges for reading as well. So it's 2-digit numbers are a precursor to 3-letter words because it's the first time they see two characters next to each other. That means more than just the one character by itself. And that's another problem that kindergarten teachers kindergarten first grade teachers face, where it's like, we got to get the kid from saying CAT to cat to understanding it's a cat. Right. And so it's like this training and meaning, right? If you don't get it and you're just trying to memorize to get through. So like if you're memorizing your multiplication tables, but you don't know when to use multiplication to solve a problem. One, multiplication is useless to you, but two, like you're developing these strategies based on like heuristic that don't make any sense. So like, oh, well, how do I figure out in this word problem what numbers to multiply together? Well, if there's only two numbers, but like you didn't get it. So like when you see the problem in real life and there's 4 numbers, what do you do?
Right. There's really no practical application here. So the lesson I think for parents here is like, is this kid parroting or are they actually prepared? So we're running out of time here, but real quick, let people know. So rundown for where can they find you? Where can they find the system?
Sure. Well, if you go to elephantlearning.com, you'll find the system. You'll be able to create an account, get in it. You'll also see our book, Treating Mathematics Anxiety, which is also on Amazon, and Amazon's the best place to get it. But if you get it from our website, I'll sign it for you. I got a stack of books here, and we got these homeschool parents that order through the government. And so it's like, yeah, okay, cool. I'll sign those and send them to you.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day for us. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. That was interesting.
It's an interesting point that you brought up about preparedness and tutoring, but I think that we see that with so many things, and this is no shade to any parents who are doing this, but I am amazed by the number of private athletic coaches in first grade, private tutors, and again, I get that you and I live in an environment of people who can afford those luxuries.
Sure.
But kind of interesting to his point when we were talking about the idea of, and we're experiencing this with Hudson. So with Jacob, he entered kindergarten knowing how to read, knowing how to do math. Right. And we just assume that that's what is, right? And we didn't have the experience of having to sit down with him every night and, okay, CAT spelled.
Sure.
With Hudson, we're doing those kinds of things because he just has a mind that works differently than Jacob's does, probably more appropriately skilled for his age than our older son was.
Sure.
But when he was talking about this idea of like, could you imagine? I can't imagine, had we not had the luxury and convenience of being able to afford pre-K, what that would have looked like.
How you would possibly be ready. Right. Well, and I think that different schools have different standards and different, I mean, when Brighton applied for her pre-K,
I remember it with the test,
3.5.
Well, and the name test. Remember
and it was a name test, and it was, so she's 3.5 years old. And the only reason we know this, you guys, is because it was a COVID year and you had to record it from home. All these private school tests are done in private.
Right.
You don't ever know what. You can find out this. There's a psychological exam and there's this CATS test. There's a bunch of different things and you can find out the score. But exactly, unless your child says, they asked me to count from 1 to 10. They asked me to put 10 things on the table. And it's interesting that he brought that up because at 3.5, she was expected to write 1 through 10, or not expected to.
Right.
But they asked, can you write 1 through 10? And then can you put 10 items out on the table? Counted out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I thought, wow, this is really young for this.
And then her first and last name.
And then her first and last name.
Which is a lot.
It's a lot. It was honestly the most it's the most charming video you've ever seen. I've gone back to it now because now that was 4 years ago, and it's like the cutest thing in the world. She confidently writes her name incorrectly, kind of like misspelled a little bit, but confidently. And I wonder, I'm like, well, maybe that's why she got in. Who knows?
Right.
But it's just interesting to see because, again, most parents don't have the resources for the private tutoring, which is perhaps where his system comes in because you can kind of do it on your own and self-paced. But
I remember with the boys they did, and it's a public school, so it wasn't for placement or anything like that. But I think as they kind of like look at kids and personalities and decide who's going to be in whose class and whatever else, they came out and I said, well, what do they do? I said, well, they asked me my name and if I went to school. I said, and then did you have to do anything? And they said, we had to do rhyming. And I said, oh,
cute.
What did you have to rhyme? And they said, they asked me to rhyme something with truck. And I was like, oh gosh.
This is a trick. This is a test.
I was like, is this a test
of
my
the parenting test?
That's right. Is this a test of my parenting or of you being I said, what did you say? And he said, well, I said duck.
Obviously,
I said,
Dad.
Okay. He said, and then they asked me to rhyme muck.
Oh my God, they were really stretching.
Well, I was like, well, then what did you say? And luckily he didn't say anything that he heard Dad say that they weren't supposed to say.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, wait a second.
Such a specific, sneaky little rhyming word.
Can we rhyme cat?
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So we'll link the information. It's interesting. Math anxiety. I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, it's a phrase that makes sense. Hey, we want to remind you, we've been really enjoying all the comments and feedback that we get on the podcast. So please keep it coming. It helps us to create content that we know that you want to hear. Go ahead and click click subscribe, and we will see you every Tuesday morning on your favorite podcast platform. In the meantime, go find yourself a friend you don't need to clean the house for. We'll see you soon.